"Ma'am, step away from the counter," Richard Hayes commanded across Sterling Grand Hotel's marble lobby. Behind him, Ashley and Marcus flanked the desk, eyes locked on the black woman in jeans requesting the penthouse suite. "Your card." He snapped his fingers. Jasmine Williams slid it over. Richard picked it up with 2 fingers, examined it like Monopoly money. "Security, lobby, now." The intercom crackled. Sophie Martinez raised her phone. Jacob Thompson hit Liv. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward. "Her reservation is valid." Richard's eyes flashed. "One more word and you're gone." The lobby went silent. Every phone turned toward the desk. Jasmine pressed a button in her purse. 2 blocks away, Nia Thompson's screen lit up. "Initiate protocol." Richard opened the safe, dropped her card inside. The door slammed shut. Jasmine spoke quietly. "You have exactly 2 hours." Richard laughed. 2 hours for what?" She didn't answer. At that moment, phones rang in boardrooms across Atlanta. The Sterling Grand Hotel penthouse suite overlooked downtown Atlanta like a kingdom of glass and steel. Inside the marble bathroom, Jasmine Williams adjusted the tiny camera lens hidden in her purse's interior pocket. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, testing the wireless connection to her phone. The device was smaller than a quarter, practically invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "Test recording active," she whispered to herself, checking the clarity on her phone screen. Perfect audio, crystal clear video. Every word, every gesture, every moment of what was about to happen would be documented. But this wasn't about business, this was personal. 2 weeks ago, her 16-year-old daughter Zoe had walked into this exact hotel lobby for a school event. Honor roll student, debate team captain, college-bound with a 4.2 GPA. Zoe had worn her best dress, carried her invitation, and approached the front desk with the confidence Jasmine had taught her to carry everywhere. The same manager who would soon humiliate Jasmine had looked at Zoe, really looked at her, and decided she didn't belong. "This event is invitation only," Richard Hayes had said, examining Zoe's perfectly valid invitation like it was suspicious. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" "Yes, sir, I'm here for the academic excellence reception," Zoe had replied politely. Richard had made a show of checking his computer, typing unnecessarily, making Zoe wait. Other students, white students, walked past the desk without question, but Zoe stood there for 15 minutes while Richard verified her invitation. "You'll need to wait over there," he'd finally said, pointing to a corner near the service elevator. "We'll call your name if we can confirm your attendance." Zoe had waited, and waited. She watched as other students were escorted to the ballroom, their names never called, their invitations never questioned. When the reception was half over, a teacher finally found her and demanded to know why she wasn't inside. That night, Zoe had cried in Jasmine's arms, not because she'd missed the reception, because she'd been made to feel small in a room full of people who looked at her and saw something less than worthy. "Mummy," Zoe had whispered through her tears, "why did he make me wait? Why was I different from everyone else?" Jasmine had held her daughter close, feeling a familiar rage that went all the way back to her own childhood. She'd experienced the same looks, the same assumptions, the same careful politeness that carried the sharp edge of prejudice. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't a 16-year-old girl with no power and no voice. This time she owned the building. "I'm going to fix this baby," Jasmine had promised, stroking Zoe's hair. "Mommy's going to make sure this never happens to you again, or to anyone." Now 48 hours later, Jasmine stood in the same penthouse suite where she'd made that promise. The hidden camera was ready, her phone was charged, her assistant Nia had legal documentation prepared. And most importantly, Jasmine had dressed the part. No designer clothes, no jewelry, no obvious markers of wealth or status. Just jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. To anyone looking at her, she would appear to be exactly what Richard Hayes expected to see. Someone who didn't belong in a place like Sterling Grand. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror one last time. In 4 hours, she had a board meeting where 3 directors would vote on whether to remove her as CEO. They claimed recent incidents at Sterling Properties had damaged the brand's reputation. They claimed she was too emotionally invested in day-to-day operations. They had no idea that in 2 hours, she would give them exactly the kind of emotional investment that would save the company and transform the industry. Jasmine touched the hidden camera one more time, then walked to the window. 12 stories below, Atlanta's business district hummed with afternoon energy. Somewhere in those glass towers, her competitors were probably celebrating, thinking Sterling Hotels was about to implode under the weight of discrimination lawsuits and bad publicity. They were wrong. Sterling wasn't going to implode. It was going to explode into something better, something unprecedented, something that would force every hotel chain in America to confront the reality of how they treated guests who didn't fit their narrow definition of appropriate. Jasmine picked up her phone and speed-dialed. "Nia, it's time." "Legal team standing by," came the crisp reply. "Recording equipment tested and ready. Are you sure you want to do this?" Jasmine thought about Zoe, about the promise she'd made, about every young black girl who would walk into a hotel lobby after today and be treated with the respect she deserved from the very first moment. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. What she was about to discover would change Sterling Hotels forever. The automatic doors of Sterling Grand Hotel whispered open, and Jasmine Williams stepped into the kind of lobby that usually made people pause in appreciation. Marble floors imported from Italy reflected the light from 3 crystal chandeliers, each one worth more than most people's cars. Gold-veined columns rose to a ceiling painted with classical scenes that belonged in a museum. The scent of expensive flowers and leather furniture created an atmosphere of refined luxury. But Jasmine didn't pause. She didn't look up at the chandeliers or admire the art. She walked across that marble floor with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who had every right to be there, even though she knew her appearance suggested otherwise. Behind the mahogany front desk, Richard Hayes looked up from his computer screen. At 45, Richard had perfected the art of the dismissive glance. His eyes moved from Jasmine's scuffed sneakers to her faded jeans to her plain black t-shirt, and his expression shifted from neutral professionalism to barely concealed irritation. To Richard's left stood Ashley Park, a 30-year-old front desk clerk whose smile could freeze water when directed at the wrong kind of guest. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a style that screamed corporate efficiency, and her navy blazer was pressed to perfection. To Richard's right, Marcus Johnson, 26, leaned against the desk with the casual confidence of someone who'd learned to read social hierarchies and position himself accordingly. All 3 of them watched Jasmine approach with the kind of attention usually reserved for potential shoplifters. "Good afternoon," Jasmine said, her voice calm and clear. "I have a reservation, penthouse suite." The words hung in the air for a moment too long. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, and Ashley actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that carried just enough plausible deniability to avoid being called out as rude. "I'm sorry," Richard said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "Did you say penthouse suite?" "Yes, the name is Williams. Jasmine Williams." Richard made a show of turning to his computer, his fingers moving across the keyboard with exaggerated care. Ashley leaned over to peer at the screen, and Marcus crossed his arms, creating a wall of skepticism behind the mahogany barrier. Richard murmured, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "That's interesting." From across the lobby, Sophie Martinez looked up from her phone. The 25-year-old travel blogger had been posting about Atlanta's luxury hotels all week, and something about the tone of the conversation at the front desk made her photographer's instincts tingle. She discreetly opened her camera app. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked. Richard looked up from his screen, his expression a masterpiece of false concern. "Well, Ms. Williams, was it? The penthouse suite is our most exclusive accommodation. It's typically reserved for our VIP clientele." "I understand that." "And you booked this? How exactly?" Behind the concierge desk, Sarah Mitchell felt her stomach tighten. At 28, Sarah had been working in hospitality for 6 years, and she knew exactly what was happening. She'd seen this dance before. The careful questions, the implied suspicions, the way certain guests were made to prove their worthiness while others were welcomed without question. Sarah pulled up the reservation system on her computer. The booking was right there. Williams Jasmine Penthouse Suite. 2 nights. Paid in full with a Black American Express card. No notes, no flags, no problems. Everything was legitimate. "Ma'am," Ashley interjected, stepping forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we just want to make sure everything is in order. You understand? We have to protect our guests' security." Jacob Thompson, a 29-year-old social media manager from Chicago, had been live-streaming his Atlanta vacation to his modest but engaged following. Something about the tension at the front desk made him pivot his phone's camera toward the scene unfolding. "What kind of security concerns?" Jasmine asked. Richard leaned back in his chair, his body language screaming authority. "Credit card fraud is unfortunately common in the hospitality industry, especially with high-value reservations. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, not stated directly, but clear enough for everyone in the lobby to understand the implication. "I see," Jasmine said softly, "and you suspect my reservation because—" The question was a trap, and Richard stepped right into it. "Because people who can afford the penthouse suite don't usually—" He gestured vaguely at her clothing. "Don't usually what?" Richard's jaw tightened. He'd said more than he intended, and now he was committed to a path that would define the next 2 hours of his life. "Don't usually dress so casually for check-in," he finished. Sarah Mitchell closed her eyes briefly, knowing she was about to witness something that would either destroy careers or change everything, because the woman standing at that desk wasn't just any guest questioning the system. She was the system. But Richard Hayes was about to learn that the hard way. The lobby of Sterling Grand Hotel had the kind of acoustics that carried whispered conversations across marble floors and up to painted ceilings. So when Richard Hayes raised his voice just slightly, everyone heard him. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some additional identification." Jasmine Williams didn't react to the request itself. She reached into her purse and pulled out her driver's license, sliding it across the mahogany desk with the same calm efficiency she'd shown with her credit card. But the hidden camera in her purse captured the moment Richard's fingers lingered over her ID, examining it like a forgery. "Georgia resident," he said, loud enough for the growing audience to hear. "But this address—" He squinted at the license. "This is a very upscale area. Buckhead." The implication was clear. Someone dressed like Jasmine couldn't possibly afford to live in one of Atlanta's most expensive neighborhoods. Ashley Park leaned over Richard's shoulder, making a show of examining the ID. "The photo's a little blurry," she said, holding it up to the light. "Sometimes people alter these." From her position behind the concierge desk, Sarah Mitchell felt her professional composure cracking. She'd remained silent for too long, watching this degrading theater unfold, while a legitimate guest was treated like a criminal. But the reservation was right there on her screen. Valid, paid, no red flags whatsoever. "Excuse me," Sarah called out, stepping around her desk. "I can see the reservation in our system. Everything appears to be in order." Richard's head snapped toward Sarah with the speed of a striking snake. "Did I ask for your input?" "No, sir, but—" "Then keep your opinions to yourself unless you want to start looking for another job." The threat hung in the air like a blade, sharp and unmistakable. Sarah felt every eye in the lobby turn toward her, measuring her response. She could step back, retreat to her desk, and let this play out like it had dozens of times before. Or she could do what she knew was right. She took another step forward. "The guest has provided valid identification and payment," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the marble expanse. "There's no reason to question the legitimacy of her reservation." Sophie Martinez's phone was already recording. She'd started filming the moment the confrontation began, her travel blogger instincts recognizing a story that went far beyond hotel reviews. Now she watched through her screen as a young concierge put her job on the line for a stranger. "Girl, yes," Sophie whispered to herself, making sure to capture every angle. Jacob Thompson's live stream had attracted more viewers. His follower count was modest, but his audience was engaged and the comments were flowing. "This is discrimination 100%. Someone needs to call corporate. That employee defending her is a real one. Why is this taking so long?" Marcus Johnson, who had been content to let Richard and Ashley handle the situation, suddenly realized the scope of what was happening. Phones were up, people were watching, and this was being documented in real time. "Maybe we should just—" he started. "No," Richard cut him off. "We follow protocol. Always." He turned back to Jasmine, his voice taking on an edge of controlled aggression. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to hold your credit card while we verify your account with the bank." It was the moment Jasmine had been waiting for. Not because she wanted to be humiliated, but because she needed Richard to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Taking a guest's valid credit card and holding it against their will wasn't policy, It was theft. You want to confiscate my credit card?" Jasmine asked, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "It's not confiscation," Ashley interjected quickly. "It's temporary holding for verification purposes." "And if I refuse?" Richard smiled, the kind of smile that said he'd been looking forward to this moment. "Then I'll have to ask you to leave the premises while we sort this out." The lobby had gone completely quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Luggage wheels stopped rolling. Even the background music seemed to fade as everyone focused on the drama unfolding at the front desk. Jasmine looked around the room, taking in the faces staring at her. Some showed sympathy, others curiosity. A few displayed the uncomfortable recognition of witnessing something they knew was wrong, but weren't sure how to address. She made her decision. "Take the card," she said, sliding it across the mahogany surface. Richard's smile widened as he picked up the black American Express card. Smart choice. He walked to the small safe behind the desk, making a theatrical production of opening it and placing the card inside. The metal door closed with a sharp click that echoed across the marble lobby like a gavel falling. "Now," Richard said, returning to the desk, "you can wait over there while we complete our verification process." He pointed to a small seating area near the service elevators, the same spot where Zoe had been forced to wait 2 weeks earlier. Jasmine didn't move toward the designated waiting area. Instead, she looked directly at Richard Hayes and spoke with a clarity that cut through the tension like a blade. "You just made the biggest mistake of your professional life." What happened next would shock everyone in that lobby. The Sterling Grand Hotel lobby had transformed into something resembling a crime scene, with guests positioning themselves like witnesses to an unfolding drama. Phones were raised at strategic angles, conversations conducted in urgent whispers, and everyone seemed to understand they were watching something significant happen in real time. Richard Hayes stood behind the mahogany desk like a judge who'd just delivered a verdict, his confidence radiating across the marble floor. The safe containing Jasmine's credit card sat behind him like evidence in a vault, proof of his authority and her apparent deception. But Jasmine Williams hadn't moved toward the waiting area. She stood exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her expression unreadable, and that stillness, that complete lack of panic or pleading, began to unsettle everyone watching. "Ma'am," Ashley Park said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before, "you really do need to wait over there while we verify your account." "I'll wait right here," Jasmine replied calmly. Marcus Johnson shifted uncomfortably. Something about this woman's demeanor wasn't adding up. People who were caught in fraud usually got angry, defensive, or desperate. They didn't stand quietly and speak with the kind of steady authority that made you second-guess your assumptions. "Sir," Marcus whispered to Richard, "maybe we should just—" "No," Richard snapped. "She's running a scam and I'm not falling for it." From her live stream, Jacob Thompson was reading comments aloud to his growing audience. "Guys, the chat is going crazy. Someone's saying this might be bigger than it looks." Sarasin ATL just said, "That lady looks familiar," with a bunch of eye emojis. Sophie Martinez had stopped taking casual video and started conducting serious documentation. Her travel blog had morphed into investigative journalism as she captured every angle, every expression, every moment of what felt like a powder keg about to explode. "Wait," said a voice from across the lobby. An elderly woman with silver hair and a Hermes bag was squinting at Jasmine. "Don't I know you from somewhere?" The question sent a ripple of speculation through the crowd. Other guests began studying Jasmine more carefully, their expressions shifting from casual curiosity to focused attention. "She does look familiar," murmured a man in a business suit. "Is she somebody famous?" whispered a young woman to her companion. Sarah Mitchell, who had been watching the crowd's reaction with growing anxiety, felt her heart rate spike. She'd recognized something the moment Jasmine walked in, not her face necessarily, but her presence. The way she moved through space like she owned it. The way she spoke with quiet authority even while being humiliated. And now other people were starting to notice too. Richard, oblivious to the shifting energy in the room, decided to escalate. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the lobby, his voice carrying the false authority of someone who'd mistaken silence for compliance. "I want to assure you that Sterling Grand Hotel takes fraud very seriously. We will not allow anyone to compromise the security and integrity of our establishment." It was a speech designed to position him as the hero of this story. The vigilant manager protecting innocent guests from a clever criminal. But instead of nods of approval, he received stares of disapproval and discomfort. "Fraud?" called out Sophie Martinez, her phone still recording. "What fraud? She showed you her ID and credit card." "That's right," added Jacob Thompson, his live stream now approaching 1,000 viewers. "She's done everything you asked." Richard's jaw tightened. This wasn't going according to plan. The crowd was supposed to support him, not question him. "Sometimes," he said, raising his voice, "people try to use stolen or altered documents to access luxury accommodations they can't afford. It's more common than you might think." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Are you saying her ID is fake?" Sarah Mitchell asked, her voice cutting through the tension. "I'm saying we have protocols," Richard replied. "But you haven't actually verified anything," Sarah continued. "You just took her card and put it in a safe." Richard's face was reddening. "Miss Mitchell, I've warned you once." "No," Sarah interrupted, her voice stronger now. "I've worked here for 3 years, and I've never seen you treat any other guest like this. Ever." The lobby fell silent again, but this time the silence carried weight. Because Sarah had just said what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. This treatment wasn't standard protocol. It was something else entirely. Jasmine reached into her purse and touched a small button. 2 blocks away, in a corporate office overlooking downtown Atlanta, Nia Thompson's computer screen lit up with an incoming signal. "Protocol initiated," Nia said into her headset. "Legal team, please stand by. We are now in active documentation phase." On her screen, the live feed from Jasmine's hidden camera showed the lobby in perfect detail. Every face, every word, every moment of discrimination being captured for legal review. "Ma'am?" Nia's voice came through Jasmine's nearly invisible earpiece. "We're recording everything. The documentation is legally admissible. Proceed when ready." Jasmine nodded almost imperceptibly, then looked directly at Richard Hayes. "You asked about protocols," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby. "Let me tell you about protocols." The truth she was about to reveal would change everything. Sarah Mitchell had reached her breaking point. 3 years of watching Richard Hayes treat certain guests like suspects, while others walked through the lobby, like royalty had built up inside her, like pressure in a sealed container. Now standing in front of a woman being systematically humiliated for no reason other than Richard's prejudice, that container finally exploded. "I need to check something," Sarah announced, moving toward the back office behind the front desk. "Stay where you are," Richard commanded, but Sarah was already pushing through the door marked "Staff Only." The office was a cramped space lined with filing cabinets, computer terminals, and a large window overlooking the employee parking garage. Sarah went straight to Richard's desk, her hands trembling as she opened drawers and shuffled through papers. She found what she was looking for in the bottom drawer: a small digital camera, several USB drives, and a manila folder labeled VIP Profiles. Inside the folder were printed photographs of hotel guests, intimate shots taken without permission, personal information compiled without consent, and handwritten notes about their spending habits, personal relationships, and private conversations. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her stomach turning as she flipped through page after page of surveillance documentation. The photographs weren't random. They were targeted. Rich guests, celebrity visitors, business executives, anyone who might have information valuable to tabloids or corporate competitors. Richard had been running a spying operation inside Sterling Grand Hotel, using his position to gather intelligence on high-value targets. Sarah's hands shook as she found a section labeled Current Targets. At the top of the list was a name that made her blood run cold: Jay Williams, CEO Sterling Hotels, high priority, confirm identity. Richard knew who Jasmine was. He'd known from the moment she walked into the lobby. The discrimination, the public humiliation, the theatrical confiscation of her credit card, none of it was about security protocols or fraud prevention. It was about destroying the reputation of Sterling Hotels' CEO in the most public, documented way possible. Sarah grabbed the folder and the camera, her mind racing. She had to get this evidence to someone. But who? Richard controlled the hotel security. He had allies among the staff. And somewhere in that folder might be information about who was paying him to sabotage his own company. "Sarah!" Richard's voice boomed from the lobby. "Get out here now." She tucked the folder under her blazer and walked back into the lobby where the tension had escalated to a breaking point. More guests had gathered, phones were recording from multiple angles, and Jacob Thompson's livestream was approaching 2,000 viewers. "Where were you?" Richard demanded. "Checking our fraud protocols," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "The ones you claim to follow." She looked directly at Jasmine, whose expression remained unreadable, but whose eyes seemed to communicate something Sarah couldn't quite interpret. Understanding, maybe, or appreciation, or perhaps something more calculating. "And what did you find?" Richard asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Sarah held up the folder. "I found this." The lobby went quiet as Sarah opened the manila folder and displayed its contents. Photographs of guests in private moments, personal information compiled without consent, financial data that had clearly been obtained through unauthorized access. "What the hell is that?" Marcus Johnson asked, stepping closer to examine the documents. "This," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby, "is evidence that our manager has been illegally surveillance hotel guests and selling their private information." The accusation hit the lobby like a physical force. Guests gasped, phones pivoted to capture Richard's reaction, and Sophie Martinez's travel blog just became the most important documentation she'd ever created. Richard's face went white, then red, then white again. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Sarah held up a photograph of a prominent Atlanta businessman emerging from a hotel room with a woman who wasn't his wife. This was taken 3 weeks ago. The businessman's divorce attorney received an anonymous tip 2 days later. Jacob Thompson's livestream comments were exploding. This just got real. He's been spying on guests. Someone call the FBI. This is insane." "Sarah," Richard said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper, "put that away right now or what?" Sarah interrupted. "You'll fire me. You'll call security." "Which one of your accomplices should I be worried about?" Jasmine Williams, who had been observing this development with the focus of a chess master watching an opponent make a critical error, finally spoke. "The camera," she said quietly, nodding toward the device in Sarah's hand. "How long has he been using it?" Sarah checked the device's memory. "According to the file dates, at least 18 months. And the targets?" Sarah flipped through the folder. CEOs, politicians, entertainment industry executives, professional athletes, anyone with money, influence, or secrets worth selling. Jasmine nodded slowly, then looked directly at Richard Hayes. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the lobby lean forward to listen. "Richard," she said, "we need to talk." What she revealed next would expose the full scope of his crimes. The USB drives in Sarah Mitchell's hands contained more than just photographs. As she plugged the first one into her computer terminal, the screen filled with folders labeled by date, target name, and information type. 18 months of systematic espionage was organized like a professional intelligence operation. "Look at this," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the lobby as guests pressed closer to see the evidence. "He's got financial records, private conversations, family information, medical details." Jasmine Williams moved closer to the computer, her expression shifting from calm observation to focused analysis. She was no longer just a victim being discriminated against. She was a CEO investigating a criminal conspiracy that had been operating inside her own hotel. "Who's buying this information?" she asked. Sarah clicked through the files, finding a folder labeled Clients. Inside were contact details for tabloid journalists, private investigators, divorce attorneys, and corporate intelligence firms. But at the bottom of the list was an entry that made everyone pause. Prestige Hospitality Group, priority client, maximum compensation. The name hit the lobby like a bomb. Prestige Hospitality Group was Sterling Hotel's primary competitor, a massive corporation that had been systematically acquiring independent hotel chains across the Southeast. "He's selling information to our competition," Marcus Johnson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just information," Jasmine corrected, studying the files. "Strategic intelligence. Guest preferences, corporate booking patterns, pricing structures, staffing vulnerabilities." She looked up at Richard, who stood frozen behind the mahogany desk. "You've been sabotaging Sterling hotels from the inside." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The confident authority he'd displayed just minutes earlier had evaporated, replaced by the desperate panic of someone whose carefully constructed criminal enterprise was collapsing in real time. "That's not... I didn't..." he stammered. "Upload receipts," Sarah announced, clicking through another folder. "Richard's been paid $47,000 over the past year and a half. Jacob Thompson's live stream was now approaching 3,000 viewers, with comments flowing too fast to read. Corporate espionage live. This is better than Netflix. Someone call the police. Plot twist after plot twist." Sophie Martinez had stopped recording for her travel blog and started documenting for what was clearly going to be a major news story. "This is incredible," she whispered to herself, making sure her phone captured every detail of the evidence being revealed. "But wait," Ashley Park said, her voice shaking as she realized the implications. "If he's been spying on guests, how many of us are involved? How much do they know about hotel operations?" The question sent a chill through the lobby. If Richard had been documenting guest information for 18 months, he'd also been observing staff patterns, security protocols, and operational weaknesses. Everyone who worked at Sterling Grand, and everyone who stayed there, had potentially been compromised. Jasmine reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, dialing a number on speaker so the entire lobby could hear. "Nia," she said when the call connected, "we need emergency protocol. Full security audit of all Sterling properties, immediate background investigations of all management staff, and legal review of every data breach potential." "Already initiated," came Nia Thompson's crisp response through the speaker. "Legal team is standing by for criminal referrals. Should we contact law enforcement?" "Yes, and contact the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division. This appears to be interstate commercial espionage." Richard finally found his voice. "You can't prove anything. Those files could be fake, planted, altered." "Actually," Sarah interrupted, holding up another piece of evidence, "we can prove everything." She displayed a handwritten note in Richard's distinctive scrawl. "Williams arriving Tuesday. Confirm CEO status, maximum documentation required, prestige bonus pending." The note was dated 3 days earlier. The lobby erupted in gasps and murmurs as the full scope of Richard's plan became clear. He hadn't been conducting random discrimination. He'd been executing a targeted operation to humiliate and destroy Sterling Hotel's CEO in the most public way possible. Jasmine looked at the note, then at Richard, then back at the gathered crowd of guests and staff. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of controlled fury that made everyone in the room understand they were witnessing history. "You knew exactly who I was from the moment I walked through those doors," she said. "The discrimination, the humiliation, the public spectacle, all of it was orchestrated to damage Sterling Hotel's reputation and provide content for your clients." Richard's last desperate gambit was to appeal to authority that no longer existed. "You don't understand the hospitality industry. Competition is fierce. Everyone does intelligence gathering." "Everyone," Jasmine replied with deadly calm, "does not spy on their own guests and sell their private information to competitors." She turned to address the entire lobby, her voice carrying clearly across the marble floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today isn't just discrimination, it's corporate sabotage, and it ends right now. The consequences that followed would reshape the entire industry." The Sterling Grand Hotel lobby had transformed into something resembling a war room. Guests huddled around Sarah Mitchell's computer terminal. Phones captured every revelation from multiple angles, and the evidence of Richard Hayes's criminal conspiracy spread across the mahogany front desk like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. But Richard wasn't finished. Cornered and desperate, he made one final play for control. "Security!" he barked into the intercom, his voice echoing across the marble lobby. "Code red. Front desk. Immediate response required." Within moments, 2 men in blazers appeared from the elevator bay, but something about them didn't feel right. Real hotel security would have badges, radios, and professional demeanor. These men moved like hired muscle, and their eyes went immediately to Jasmine Williams. "Ma'am," the larger man said, approaching Jasmine with deliberate intimidation, "you need to come with us." Jacob Thompson's livestream audience had grown to over 4,000 viewers, and the comments were moving so fast they blurred, "Fake security alert. Those aren't real cops. This is getting dangerous. Someone call 911. But before the fake security could reach Jasmine, something unexpected happened. The guests in the lobby moved, not away from the confrontation but toward it. A human barrier formed spontaneously around Jasmine Williams, created by people who had watched her be humiliated and now refused to let it escalate to intimidation. "Excuse me," said an elderly woman with silver hair, positioning herself directly between the fake security and Jasmine. "Are you actual hotel security or private contractors?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Real security would have badges, identification, and answers. These men had none of those things. "Ma'am, please step aside," the larger man said, but his voice carried the kind of uncertainty that comes with being exposed. "No," said a businessman in a navy suit, moving to stand beside the elderly woman. "I don't think we will." Sophie Martinez captured every moment, her phone recording as more guests joined the protective circle. A mother with a teenage daughter, a young couple on their honeymoon, a group of college friends visiting Atlanta, people who had nothing in common except the shared recognition that they were witnessing something fundamentally wrong. "This is unbelievable," Sophie whispered into her phone. "The guests are literally protecting her from fake security." Marcus Johnson, who had been silent since the discovery of Richard's espionage operation, finally found his voice. "Richard," he said, his tone carrying a mixture of disgust and disbelief, "what have you done?" But Richard wasn't answering questions anymore. He was frantically trying to delete files from his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he attempted to destroy evidence in real time. Sarah Mitchell saw what he was doing and lunged for the power cord, yanking it from the wall. The computer screen went black, but not before she'd managed to save the most damaging files to her personal drive. "You're too late," she announced to the lobby. "Everything's been backed up." The fake security guards looked at each other, realizing their simple intimidation job had become a complicated situation with too many witnesses and too much documentation. They backed toward the elevator without another word, abandoning Richard to face the consequences alone. Jasmine watched them retreat, then turned her attention back to Richard. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that comes from someone who has finally decided to stop being patient. "Richard Hayes," she said, each word deliberate and clear, "you have systematically violated the privacy of our guests, sold confidential information to our competitors, and attempted to destroy this company from within. But more than that." She gestured to the lobby full of witnesses, the phones recording every word. The evidence spread across the front desk. "You thought you could humiliate me because of the color of my skin and the clothes I chose to wear. You thought you could treat me like a criminal because I didn't look like your idea of someone who belongs in a place like this." The lobby was completely silent now, everyone hanging on every word. "What you didn't know," Jasmine continued, "is that I built this place. Every marble tile, every crystal chandelier, every single job in this building exists because I created it. And now..." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, dialing a number that would change everything. "Naya," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby, "initiate termination protocol for Richard Hayes, Ashley Park, and Marcus Johnson, effective immediately." "Confirmed," came Nia Thompson's voice through the speaker. "Processing terminations now." Within seconds, the access badges worn by all three employees began flashing red. Their computer logins were disabled, their security clearances revoked, their employment with Sterling Hotels terminated in real time. Ashley Park stared at her badge in horror. This can't be happening. Marcus Johnson looked around the lobby desperately, as if searching for someone to appeal to. "Wait, I didn't know about the spying. I just followed Richard's lead." But Jasmine's expression remained unchanged. "You followed his lead when he discriminated against guests. You followed his lead when he humiliated people who didn't look like they belonged. You made a choice, Marcus. All of you did." Richard, his face now completely drained of color, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "You can't do this." "There are procedures, protocols, union protections." "Actually," Sarah Mitchell said, stepping forward with a confidence she'd never displayed before, "she can do exactly this, because according to these files," she held up the documents she'd discovered, "she's not just any guest complaining about discrimination." Sarah turned to address the entire lobby, her voice carrying clearly across the marble floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, the woman you've watched being humiliated for the past hour is Jasmine Williams, founder and CEO of Sterling Hotels. She owns this building, this company, and she's been documenting every moment of discrimination for legal action. The lobby erupted in gasps, murmurs, and the sound of phones capturing the most dramatic revelation in Sterling Grand Hotel's history. The truth was finally out, and the consequences were just beginning. The revelation of Jasmine Williams's true identity hit the Sterling Grand Hotel lobby like a seismic shock. For a moment, the only sound was the subtle hum of air conditioning and the distant traffic from downtown Atlanta. Then the lobby exploded into chaos. "Oh my God," Ashley Park whispered, her face going pale as the full scope of her mistake became clear. We just discriminated against our own CEO." Marcus Johnson backed away from the front desk as if it had become radioactive. "I didn't know," he kept repeating. "I swear I didn't know who she was." But Richard Hayes, his criminal conspiracy exposed and his career destroyed, decided to go down fighting. The mask of professional courtesy finally fell away completely, revealing the ugly truth that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. "So what?" he snarled, his voice carrying across the marble lobby with vicious clarity. "You think because you own this place, you can walk in here looking like that and expect to be treated like royalty?" The words hung in the air like poison gas. Every phone in the lobby captured them, every witness heard them, and everyone understood that Richard had just confessed to exactly the kind of discrimination that destroys careers and changes laws. Jacob Thompson's livestream audience had swelled to over 5,000 viewers, and the comments were a blur of outrage. "Did he just say that? Racist says what? This is going viral worldwide. Fire him again." Sophie Martinez zoomed in on Richard's face, capturing every detail of his expression as he continued his self-destructive rant. "People like you think you can just buy your way into respect," Richard continued, his voice rising with each word. "But respect is earned, and it's earned by looking the part, acting the part, being the part." "Richard, stop," Ashley pleaded, recognizing that every word was making their situation worse. But Richard was beyond reason. 18 months of criminal activity had been exposed, his carefully constructed cover was blown, and his worldview was crumbling in real time. So he decided to take everyone down with him. "You want to know the truth?" he shouted to the lobby. "Half the staff in this hotel agrees with me. We've been talking about the image problem at Sterling Hotels for years. Too many of the wrong kind of guests, too much pandering to political correctness." Sarah Mitchell, who had been documenting evidence, looked up from her computer with an expression of pure disgust. "Richard, you're making this so much worse for yourself." "Worse?" Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How can it get worse? She's going to destroy us all anyway, might as well tell the truth." He turned back to Jasmine, his eyes blazing with the kind of hatred that makes people do things they can never take back. "You walked into my lobby, in my hotel." "Your hotel?" Jasmine interrupted, her voice cutting through his tirade like a blade. "Your lobby?" For the first time since the confrontation began, Jasmine Williams stepped forward. Not aggressively, not with visible anger, but with the kind of controlled power that makes rooms go quiet and people pay attention. "Let me clarify something for you, Richard," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the marble lobby. "This has never been your hotel. You were an employee, a temporary caretaker of something I built from the ground up. And you used that temporary authority to terrorize guests who didn't fit your narrow definition of worthy." She gestured to the evidence scattered across the front desk. "But worse than that, you sold out the very people you were supposed to protect. You violated their privacy, betrayed their trust, and turned their personal information into profit for our competitors." Jasmine looked around the lobby, making eye contact with guests who had witnessed everything. "What happened here today wasn't just about me. It was about every guest who was ever made to feel unwelcome in a place they had every right to be. Every person who was judged by their appearance instead of treated with basic human dignity." She turned back to Richard, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "Your employment at Sterling Hotels is terminated. Your criminal activities will be referred to federal authorities, and your name will be flagged across the entire hospitality industry to ensure you never have the opportunity to abuse guests again." Richard's face cycled through emotions: rage, panic, disbelief, and finally, the hollow recognition of complete defeat. "This isn't over," he said weakly. Jasmine smiled for the first time since entering the lobby, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won a war they'd been fighting their entire life. "You're right," she said. "It's not over, because now the real work begins." The transformation that followed would reshape the entire hospitality industry. The moment of truth had arrived, and Jasmine Williams stood at the center of the Sterling Grand Hotel lobby, like the eye of a hurricane that was about to reshape everything in its path. The evidence of criminal conspiracy was spread across the mahogany desk. The fake security had fled, and Richard Hayes had just confessed to systematic discrimination in front of thousands of live-stream viewers. But the most important revelation was yet to come. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jasmine said, her voice carrying clearly across the marble lobby, "my name is Jasmine Williams. I am the founder and CEO of Sterling Hotels, and I own this building." The words landed with the force of an earthquake. Guests who had been watching the drama unfold suddenly realized they had witnessed something unprecedented. A CEO conducting an undercover investigation of her own company and exposing corruption at the highest levels. Jacob Thompson's livestream exploded with comments. "The plot twist of the century. She owns the whole company. This is the best thing I've ever seen, Liv. Justice is coming." Sophie Martinez was no longer just documenting a travel experience. She was capturing a historical moment that would be studied in business schools and civil rights courses for decades. "But that's not why I'm here," Jasmine continued, and the lobby fell completely silent. 2 weeks ago, my 16-year-old daughter Zoe was humiliated in this exact lobby by the same manager who just humiliated me. She was made to wait in a corner like a suspected criminal, while other students were welcomed without question. She came home in tears, asking me why she was treated differently from everyone else. The emotional core of the story hit the lobby like a physical force. This wasn't just about business or discrimination policies. This was about a mother protecting her child. "I promised my daughter that I would fix this, not with memos or policy changes or diversity training, but by exposing the truth of how certain guests are really treated when they don't fit someone's idea of who belongs in a place like this." Ashley Park, who had been standing frozen since her termination, found her voice. "Mrs. Williams, I didn't know about your daughter. If I had known—" "If you had known I was the CEO?" Jasmine interrupted. "If you had known I had power and influence? That's exactly the problem, Ashley. You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with basic human dignity." Sarah Mitchell, emboldened by the truth finally being told, stepped forward. "Mrs. Williams, I want you to know that some of us tried to speak up. I logged complaints about Richard's behavior, but they were always dismissed." "I know," Jasmine replied, her voice softening slightly. "That's why you're not being terminated. That's why you're being promoted." The lobby gasped as Jasmine turned to address Sarah directly. "Sarah Mitchell, effective immediately. You are the new general manager of Sterling Grand Hotel. You showed courage when it mattered, you protected a guest when others wouldn't, and you put your job on the line for what was right." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Williams, I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me rebuild this place into what it was always supposed to be." But even as this moment of justice unfolded, Jasmine wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number on speaker so the entire lobby could hear the conversation. "Nia," she said when the call connected, "patch me through to Carla Bennett in legal." "Carla Bennett here," came a crisp voice through the speaker. "Carla, we're proceeding with immediate termination of Richard Hayes, Ashley Park, and Marcus Johnson. We have documented evidence of criminal espionage, systematic discrimination, and violation of guest privacy. Prepare for federal criminal referrals." "Understood. Legal documentation is already prepared. Law enforcement has been notified. Mrs. Williams, we're also ready to proceed with the industry-wide initiative we discussed." The lobby held its breath, sensing that something even bigger was about to be announced. "Do it," Jasmine said. "Initiate Operation Clean House across all Sterling properties. Full audit, complete staff retraining, and zero-tolerance enforcement. I want this to be the standard that forces every hotel chain in America to examine their own practices." Richard Hayes, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally exploded. "You can't destroy people's careers over this. We made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" Jasmine's voice cut through his protest like ice. "Selling guest information to competitors isn't a mistake, Richard. It's a federal crime. Systematically discriminating against guests isn't a mistake. It's a civil rights violation. She looked around the lobby one more time, taking in the faces of guests and staff who had witnessed this unprecedented confrontation. "What happened here today isn't ending with terminations and arrests," she announced. "It's beginning a transformation that will change how every hotel in America treats its guests." The consequences of that promise would reshape an entire industry. The Sterling Grand Hotel lobby had become the epicenter of a revolution that was spreading in real time across social media, news outlets, and the hospitality industry itself. But before the national implications could fully unfold, immediate justice needed to be served. "Nia," Jasmine said into her phone, her voice carrying across the marble lobby with the authority of someone who had just reclaimed control of her own company, "execute the termination protocols. I want their access revoked, their belongings collected, and their final paperwork prepared within the hour." "Already in progress," came Nia Thompson's efficient response through the speaker. "Security badges have been deactivated, computer access has been terminated, and HR is preparing the documentation. Should I contact Atlanta Police regarding the criminal evidence?" "Yes. And contact the FBI's white-collar crime division. Corporate espionage across state lines makes this a federal matter." The reality of serious legal consequences hit Richard Hayes like a physical blow. His face went from red to pale as he realized that his criminal activities weren't just going to cost him his job, they were going to cost him his freedom. "Federal charges," Ashley Park whispered, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Williams, please, I had no idea about the espionage. I just followed Richard's lead with the guest policies." Jasmine turned to Ashley with an expression that mixed disappointment with a small measure of sympathy. "Ashley, following someone's lead doesn't excuse participating in discrimination. You had a choice every time you treated a guest differently based on their appearance. You chose to humiliate people rather than welcome them." Marcus Johnson, who had been silent since his termination, finally found his voice. "What happens to us now?" "That," Jasmine replied, "depends on how much you cooperate with the federal investigation and how much you've learned from this experience." As if summoned by her words, the elevator doors opened and two men in dark suits emerged. The first carried a badge identifying him as Agent Williams from the FBI's Atlanta field office. The second was clearly hotel security, real security this time, with proper identification and professional bearing. "Mrs. Williams," Agent Davis approached, "we received your call about corporate espionage and civil rights violations. We're here to collect evidence and interview witnesses." Jacob Thompson's livestream audience had grown to over 8,000 viewers, making it one of the most watched live events on the platform. Comments were flowing so fast they were unreadable, but the sentiment was clear. People across the country were watching justice being served in real time. "Agent Davis," Jasmine said, gesturing to the evidence spread across the front desk, "Sarah Mitchell discovered files documenting 18 months of illegal surveillance, data theft, and sale of confidential guest information to competitors." Agent Davis examined the documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This is extensive. We'll need to interview everyone involved and examine all digital evidence." Richard Hayes made one final desperate attempt to minimize his crimes. "Look, the information gathering was just competitive intelligence. Everyone in the industry does it." Agent Davis looked up from the files with the kind of expression that makes guilty people realize how much trouble they're really in. "Mr. Hayes, selling private guest information to competitors is industrial espionage. Installing hidden cameras in hotel offices is illegal surveillance. Discriminating against guests based on race is a federal civil rights violation. None of these are standard industry practices." As the FBI agent spoke, Sarah Mitchell was working at her computer terminal, transferring files and coordinating with Jasmine's legal team. "Mrs. Williams," she called out, "I'm finding more evidence." Richard had files on dozens of high-profile guests, including government officials, celebrities, and business executives. The lobby buzzed with renewed shock as the scope of the criminal enterprise became clear. This wasn't just about discrimination or competitive intelligence. It was about a systematic violation of privacy that had potentially compromised some of the most powerful people in the country. Sophie Martinez, still documenting everything for what had become the story of her career, approached Jasmine with her phone lowered. "Mrs. Williams, Can I ask how you knew to investigate your own hotel? Jasmine's expression softened as she thought about the real motivation behind everything that had happened. My daughter, she said simply. When someone hurts your child, you don't just file a complaint or write a memo. You make sure it never happens again to anyone. She looked around the lobby, taking in the faces of guests who had witnessed this unprecedented confrontation and transformation. But this isn't just about my daughter anymore, she continued. This is about every guest who's ever been made to feel unwelcome, every employee who's been pressured to participate in discrimination, and every company that thinks they can treat people as less than human without consequences. Agent Davis finished his preliminary examination of the evidence and looked up at the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll need statements from everyone who witnessed these events. What you've documented here today will be crucial evidence in multiple federal investigations. The transformation was just beginning. Within hours of Richard Hayes' arrest and the exposure of his criminal conspiracy, the Sterling Grand Hotel lobby had transformed from a crime scene into a command center for industry-wide reform. News crews arrived as FBI agents collected evidence, and Jasmine Williams found herself at the center of a story that was spreading across social media faster than anyone could track. Mrs. Williams, said Janet Rodriguez from Channel 7 Atlanta, her camera crew capturing every moment. Your undercover investigation has exposed systematic discrimination and criminal activity at one of Atlanta's most prestigious hotels. What's your next step? Jasmine stood beside the mahogany front desk, where she'd been humiliated just hours earlier, now flanked by her legal team and FBI agents. When she spoke, her voice carried the conviction of someone who had just won a battle but knew the war was far from over. This isn't ending with arrests and terminations, she announced. Today we're launching the Sterling Standard, a complete transformation of how the hospitality industry treats guests and employees. She gestured to Sarah Mitchell, who now wore a temporary general manager badge and stood with the confidence of someone whose courage had just been rewarded. Every Sterling property will undergo immediate audit. Every employee will receive new training focused on dignity, respect, and equal treatment. And any staff member who participates in discrimination will face immediate termination, no warnings, no second chances. Jacob Thompson, whose live stream had become a cultural phenomenon with over 15,000 viewers, raised his hand. Mrs. Williams, how do you ensure this kind of systematic change actually happens? How do you prevent other hotels from just covering up their own problems? It was the question everyone was thinking, and Jasmine's answer would define the next phase of the transformation. By making discrimination expensive, she replied. Sterling Hotels is offering a $10,000 reward for any documented evidence of guest discrimination at any hotel chain in America. We're also providing free legal support for guests who've experienced discrimination, and we're creating a national database of hospitality industry violations. The announcement sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. This wasn't just about reforming one company. It was about forcing an entire industry to confront its practices or face financial consequences. Sophie Martinez, who had been documenting the entire confrontation, looked up from her phone with amazement. Mrs. Williams, your story is already trending on every social media platform. Sterling Standard is being shared by celebrities, politicians, and civil rights organizations. How do you feel about becoming the face of hospitality industry reform? Jasmine's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the weight of what had just happened. I didn't set out to become the face of anything, she said. I set out to keep a promise to my daughter. But if what happened here today prevents other children from being humiliated, other guests from being discriminated against, then I'll carry that responsibility. Agent Davis approached with preliminary findings from his evidence review. Mrs. Williams, I can confirm that Mr. Hayes' criminal enterprise extends beyond Sterling Hotels. We've found evidence of similar operations at competitor properties, suggesting a network of corporate espionage across the hospitality industry. The revelation that Richard's crimes were part of a larger conspiracy added another layer to the unfolding story. What had started as a mother seeking justice for her daughter had uncovered a web of criminal activity that reached across multiple companies and potentially involved hundreds of victims. This is exactly why systemic change is necessary, Jasmine said. addressing the cameras and the live stream audience that had grown to represent viewers across the country. When discrimination becomes policy, when criminal activity becomes standard practice, individual solutions aren't enough. You need transformation at the industry level. As she spoke, Nia Thompson appeared beside her with a tablet displaying real-time social media metrics. "Mrs. Williams," she said quietly, "Sterling Hotel's stock price has jumped 12% in the past 2 hours. Booking requests are up 300%, and we're receiving calls from hotel chains across the country asking about implementing the Sterling standard." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. A CEO who had been discriminated against in her own hotel had just turned that discrimination into a catalyst for industry-wide change and increased business value. Sarah Mitchell, still processing her promotion from concierge to general manager, approached with an update from the front desk operations. "Mrs. Williams, we've received over 200 messages from guests who want to book stays specifically because of what happened here today. They're calling it justice tourism." Jasmine smiled, the first genuinely warm smile she'd shown since entering the lobby hours earlier. "Then let's make sure they get exactly the kind of experience we've always promised, but haven't always delivered." She turned to address the cameras one final time, knowing her words would reach far beyond the marble lobby of Sterling Grand Hotel. "Change doesn't happen through memos or policy updates," she said. "It happens when people decide they've had enough, stand up for what's right and refuse to accept the unacceptable. Today we stood up. Tomorrow we build something better." The final chapter of this transformation was yet to come. The Sterling Grand Hotel lobby had finally quieted. FBI agents had collected their evidence, news crews had gathered their stories, and the guests who had witnessed history being made had returned to their rooms with a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. But for Jasmine Williams, the most important moment was yet to come. Standing alone in the marble lobby where she had been humiliated just hours earlier, Jasmine pulled out her phone and dialed the number she had been thinking about all day. "Zoe?" she said when her daughter answered. "It's Mom." "Mom." Zoe's voice carried all the warmth and excitement of a 16-year-old who had been following the day's events through social media. "I saw the videos. Everyone at school is talking about what you did. Are you okay?" Jasmine looked around the lobby, at the front desk where she'd been discriminated against, at the safe where her credit card had been confiscated, at the spot where guests had formed a protective circle around her. All of it had led to this moment. "I'm perfect, baby," she said, her voice carrying across the marble space with a peace she hadn't felt in weeks. "And I kept my promise. Mommy fixed it." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and when Zoe spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. Not because you're the CEO or because you fired those people, but because you stood up. You didn't let them make you small." Jasmine felt tears she'd been holding back all day finally start to fall. "You know what the best part is, sweetheart. You never have to worry about being treated like that again. Not here, not anywhere. Because now the whole world is watching and things are going to change." "Does this mean I can finally visit your hotel without being embarrassed?" Zoe asked, and Jasmine could hear the smile in her voice. "This means you can visit any hotel in America with your head held high, knowing that if anyone treats you with disrespect, there will be consequences." As mother and daughter talked, Sarah Mitchell was conducting the evening staff meeting with a confidence that would have been unimaginable that morning. The front desk team had been completely replaced with staff from other Sterling properties, and every employee had undergone emergency training on the new protocols. "Tomorrow," Sarah announced to the assembled team, "we begin operating under the Sterling standard. Every guest who walks through those doors will be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, their accent, or their assumptions about their ability to pay." She gestured to a framed photograph that had been installed beside the front desk, a picture of Jasmine and Zoe together, smiling at the camera with the kind of joy that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. "That picture stays there as a reminder," Sarah continued. "A reminder that this hotel belongs to everyone who walks through our doors, and our job is to make them feel welcome." Meanwhile, 3 blocks away in the Fulton County Jail, Richard Hayes sat in a holding cell, contemplating how 18 months of criminal activity had led to federal charges, industry blacklisting, and the complete destruction of his career. His co-conspirators Ashley and Marcus had been released on their own recognizance after agreeing to cooperate with the FBI investigation. But Richard's crimes went far deeper than discrimination. They constituted organized criminal enterprise. At 9 p.m., exactly 12 hours after Jasmine had first walked into the Sterling Grand lobby, she stood in the same spot where she had been humiliated and looked around at what her day had accomplished. The discriminatory staff had been removed. The criminal conspiracy had been exposed. The FBI was investigating similar operations at other hotels. Sterling Hotels had become the industry leader in anti-discrimination practices. And most importantly, her daughter would never have to experience what they had both endured. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Zoe. "Mom, can we have dinner at the hotel tomorrow? I want to see the place where you changed everything." Jasmine smiled as she typed her response. "Absolutely. And this time they'll know exactly who we are from the moment we walk through the door." As she prepared to leave the lobby, Jasmine noticed a young black girl about Zoe's age checking in with her parents at the front desk. The new staff member greeted them with a genuine smile, processed their reservation efficiently, and welcomed them to Sterling Grand with the kind of warmth that made the family visibly relax. The girl looked around the marble lobby with wonder, taking in the chandeliers and columns and elegant furniture. When her eyes met Jasmine's, she smiled, the confident smile of someone who felt like she belonged exactly where she was. Jasmine smiled back, knowing that this was what victory looked like. Not the arrest of criminals or the termination of discriminatory employees, but the simple sight of a young girl walking into a luxury hotel and feeling welcome. "See you tomorrow, baby," she said quietly, thinking of Zoe. Mommy really did fix it. The transformation was complete. The legacy had just begun. The Sterling Grand Hotel in Atlanta had become a pilgrimage site for civil rights advocates, business leaders, and travelers who wanted to experience the place where the hospitality industry changed forever. The marble lobby still gleamed with Italian imports and crystal chandeliers, but now it also displayed a simple plaque near the front desk. "This space belongs to every guest, no exceptions." This is the Sterling Standard. Under Sarah Mitchell's leadership, Sterling Grand had achieved the highest guest satisfaction ratings in its history. The hotel was booked solid for the next 6 months, with visitors specifically requesting to stay at the place where justice was served. The Sterling Standard had been adopted by over 200 hotels across America, and Jasmine Williams had become a keynote speaker at hospitality industry conferences, sharing the story of how discrimination had become the catalyst for unprecedented positive change. But the most important transformation had happened in a much smaller space. The relationship between a mother and daughter who had learned that standing up for what's right isn't just about changing systems. It's about ensuring that the next generation inherits a world where their dignity is never questioned. As for Richard Hayes, he was serving an 18-month federal sentence for corporate espionage and civil rights violations. His conviction had sent shockwaves through the hospitality industry, serving as a warning that discrimination and criminal activity would no longer be tolerated or covered up. The day Jasmine Williams walked into her own hotel lobby and was told she didn't belong, had become the day the entire industry learned that everyone belongs, and those who disagree would face consequences they never saw coming. If you typed mother, justice, or family in the comments, thank you for standing with Jasmine and every parent fighting for their children. Subscribe for more incredible true stories of courage and transformation that prove justice always finds a way. Until next time, remember, your voice matters, your dignity is non-negotiable, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stay silent.